Hello everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by actor, musician, author and host Andras Jones. On today's episode we will talk extensively about his career and of course about his new album, All You Get. Welcome Andras.
Thanks a lot, Michael. It's great to be on your show.
Great to have you. Thank you very much for joining me. And Andras, as I understand, you had started your acting career back in 1988 with the film Sorority Babes in the Slamball Bowl-orama. How did you, at the age of 20, get involved with filmmaking?
Well, even earlier than that, when I was in high school, I grew up in Olympia, Washington, but I went to high school outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And when I was in high school here, I was auditioning for. We're speaking from Boston. I'm calling you, or we're talking from a basement in Watertown, Massachusetts. And so I went to high school out here, and there was a little bit of an acting scene. So I started auditioning for TV shows and films when I was still in high school, and then I had enough. I don't know, I didn't book anything much. I was in an episode of Spencer for Hire, actually, but very, very small part. But I got some commercials, and it just gave me a taste for the possibility. And so after high school, I took a year off and went out to L.A. and had some luck. But I've always, acting informs almost all the other things I do, and I think that's true for a lot of writers. I mean, writers say, you have to be an actor to get your mind inside of a character, and writers do that with a pen or song or with a guitar, and actors, professional actors, do it with other people's words and just our bodies and our spirits.
In the very same year, 1988, you had starred as Rick in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. How did this opportunity come about back then?
Well, it's sort of along the same lines. I moved out to LA. I got a manager and an agent, and they were sending me around on a lot of auditions. There's always lots of roles for young people. That's usually, if people ask me how to break into the business, well, for me, it meant moving out to LA when I was 18 years old and being getting lucky in a lot of ways. And Nightmare on Elm Street was one of those lucky things. It also is a pretty interesting synchronicity because my father was a dream psychologist. And so I grew up around the conversation about dreams and education and healing and just self-exploration, and then to find myself, I guess, probably most closely associated cinematically with a franchise that's all about dreams is, I don't know, pretty nifty.
And how did you experience the shooting of this film, knowing that this series had already become so popular by this point?
Well, to be honest, we really didn't. I mean, we really didn't know how popular it was. And I was shooting another film called Far From Home with Drew Barrymore and Anthony Rapp when it came out. So I didn't even really attend the premiere. And so I had some sense that it was popular, but also, being at that point 19 years old, turned 20 that summer, it just sort of, when things are happening to you when you're that young, you kind of just think that's how things are. But in the industry, even though it made a lot of money and it sort of helped New Line on its way, it didn't really create the stir that it has since. Really, I mean, the whole convention business, in a lot of ways, at least on the horror side, was built on Robert Englund, and being able to be a part of that legacy is, an incredible blessing. Being part of that legacy with Robert and the whole Nightmare on Elm Street franchise has brought me really a second family. And we are, the Nightmare, particularly the Nightmare 4 actors and I, we're at conventions and have been for the last 20 years together, and probably will be till, through as long as we're alive. And there's a genuine love there, and then there's also, and we've had all the stuff that comes with families. We've grown up together, we've had fights, there have been love affairs, it's complicated, but through that complicated thing, there comes a kind of intimacy, and, and it's something cool to have shared in a lifetime with some great people.
You did go on to star in several other movies, such as Tripwire, which also starred, if I'm not mistaken, Viggo Mortensen, and you did Attic Expeditions alongside Seth Green. What do you like most about the acting business? Is it exploring a character, or finding yourself inside a story which transcends everyday life?
Acting informs sort of everything that I do, because when I'm playing music, I'm embodying a song. When I'm writing something, I'm trying to embody a character in another way. Even in this, I wouldn't say people think of acting as lying, but I just think of acting as being embodied and true to the moment. So the thing about working on a film is you've got a whole team that's of really talented people who are committed to creating a situation that you can walk into and do that with incredible intention. And if there is a good eye behind the camera, and even sometimes when there isn't a great eye behind the camera and the fact that people are going to be watching it, I think creates this heightened experience that I've spent a lot of my life in the last 20 years exploring, which is how synchronicity shows up in media, and definitely to be at the center of the creation of that and have all of that focused on really setting you up to succeed, because if you succeed, everyone succeeds. The shot's great, it's the winner. Well, that's just an amazing, powerful, but it sounds pretentious, but it's a powerful shamanic ritual to be at the center of, at its best. And when it's at its worst, it can still be powerful, but then it can be like a bad trip. Man.
And Andras, if I'm not mistaken, you are not located in Los Angeles. Does this make it harder for you to act more frequently?
Well, to be honest, as far as professional acting, I live like any actor in that I'm constantly in preparation for the next role, but it's been a while, and I've spent more of my time, I've certainly spent more of my time in the last decades helping other people with their careers, working as a manager for other actors and writers and directors, and creating Radio8ball as a show, which is, I guess we'll be talking about in a bit, as a showcase for other musicians and other artists, and staying creative on my own. And again, always, hey, if you're a director out there and you're looking to pull Quentin Tarantino and bring back a guy from the 80s, I'm always game to play. But, I definitely choosing to live in Olympia and not LA when I was sort of on my roll was probably not the best thing for my career. But, it's one of those times. My father was ill, and I wanted to go back and be with him, and I had a band of musicians that I was playing with that agreed to move all the way up to Olympia and live with me while we went through that. And it was really powerful, and I can't say I wouldn't make that choice again. Although, as you say, it didn't do me any favors, especially pre-internet, where distance had more meaning, or when distance had more meaning. And I work with actors and writers and directors, and what I counsel all the time is patience and resilience and preparation, and not to set your clock by anybody else's. And it's just the greatest skill an artist can have is patience, and it's really the hardest one. Some people, things happen, or some people are Prince or the Beatles, and things happen overnight. But for most people in the world, even when things happen, there's still times when it seems like it's not happening. And so Patience, always patience, and and if you're an artist, you keep building your instrument. So yeah.
Very true. I mean, you have a good point there. I mean, for some people, as you said, everything happens quickly, and they just are, or they become very successful at the blink of an eye. At least it seems that way from the fan perspective. But I think most people have to be very patient, and they are not an overnight success. And I think patience, as they say, is a virtue, and I think it's one of the most important things. I totally agree. I mean, you have to stay patient, you have to stay focused, and then all good things come to those who wait eventually. At least I hope.
Well, I mean, I think it's more. Like, I think it's more than a virtue. I call it a superpower. It really is. Because I mean, as someone who I'm sure I've done it a lot. Yeah, you don't know how many things that could go right we fuck up because we stress out and worry because they haven't happened fast enough. And it's just like, and so, yeah, so we put, like, as artists, we put our stuff out there, and then, it has its own timetable. But if we end up in the middle of it having some temper tantrum at either the people who are around us supporting us, or at the cruel world that doesn't understand us, or the people, just ourselves, and saying, oh, I guess I suck, instead of remembering, hey, when I put it out, it was pretty good. I still feel good about it. It's taken longer than whatever it is, whether it's a film or you're putting yourself out there as an artist, as an actor, or putting out records, or whatever we do. It's just like, it's just always, no matter how fast it happens, it always takes longer than you want it to. And so developing the most impossible skill, which is patience, I think, around the stuff that you really want to happen fast.
Yes.
Is the thing that allows things to happen.
Yeah.
I wish I could whisper that in my ear, As I say this to the actors I work with all the time. I wish the things that I wish I could tell myself, my 20-year-old self, is what I tell them. Patience and preparation.
Okay, then I would say let's move on to your work as an author as well, as you have written a book which is called Accidental Initiations in the Kabbalistic Tree of Olympia. What inspired you to write this book? Could you give me some details as to which topics you wrote about?
I wrote the book because it was trying to explain some things that I always felt like it was hard to explain in real time to people who I felt close enough that I wanted them to have some context about me. It was written actually on a very personal level, and in a weird synchronicity, at the very moment when I was writing it, someone got in touch with me and asked if I could contribute a chapter to a compilation, literary compilation about synchronicity called the Sync Book. And I sent them a piece of what I've been writing, and they liked it. And within a month, I was sort of one of the last authors who was brought in, and within a month, that compilation came out, and the publisher was coming through my town, and I told them about this Kabbalistic tree. I don't know if people are familiar with the Kabbalah, but if you look up the Tree of Life, or Kabbalistic Tree of Life, you'll see an image, and this image is a map of consciousness that Kabbalists have been using for a very, very long time. And you might also recognize it as being similar to architectural patterns you see in our nation's capital and in the capitals around the United States and other countries, particularly the United States, because we were founded by Freemasons, and they were pretty, they were into that image and building around that image. And there's one in Olympia where I grew up, and it's not like shrouded in mystery. At the base of it, there's an obelisk with a kneeling Freemason, and there's this is dedicated by the Freemasons of Thurston County, and, you know, so mote it be, and all of that. So it was very clearly intentional, but also no one had ever known had ever talked about it. And so I told him I was thinking about writing a book where I explored this map through my own accidental initiations, through growing up in and around it, and then only realizing it was there after the fact. And he got very excited, and that became the first individual book that they published as a publishing house, Sync Book Press. And it was very odd being in the position of writing with the knowledge that it was probably going to be published, and feeling a kind of urgency around wanting to really capture that initial spark that had started it. And so the result is a book that I tell people I was able to write it because I abandoned the idea of writing a good book, but it was true to where I was, and I have been told that I succeeded in my main goal, which was to make it funny. So I know it may not sound funny, but some people who read it said that they found that there were plenty of laughs in it, and it's not unreadable. There's a banner headline: "Accidental Initiations Not Unreadable," says author.
Yeah, I've come across several comments by people that wrote, yeah, it's actually pretty funny at times, and people seem to respond to it and like it. I mean, so it's a great success for you as an author.
Well, yes, I mean it's strange. I mean, this is one of those strange things in life, you know, the things. And it's something that I explore on the record, All You Get, that we're going to be talking about in a moment, is that a lot of the things that we strive so hard for elude us forever. And then these other things that we never really tried that hard at, we end up having these successes that if they were happening to, you know, that I'm sure someone out there has been working so much harder as a writer, and they're listening to the story and being like, yeah, this publisher just walks through you, like, what? That's just unfair. It's like people who get a record deal, or like, you know, a record deal because they were sitting next to someone on a plane, and they're, you know, it's like, oh, I was humming a song, and I'd never thought of making a record before, but I was sitting next to this guy, and he turned out to be Rick Rubin, and then I got a record deal. And you're like, that's not fair. I've been touring for 5 years. How come I don't get to hum a song at Rick Rubin? It's because the universe is a trickster, and
yeah.
And like I said, yeah, I mean, I am strangely successful as a horror film actor and as an author, two things that I really didn't have that wasn't what I was trying for. And as a host of a Synchronicity Radio 8-ball podcast, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And in the realm of putting out my own music, you know, those are the areas where I have the most desire, and therefore I feel like probably where success feels the most, success in that sort of easy way feels the most elusive. And there's that strange paradox again, you know. Strange paradoxes, I guess, I don't know if that's just my thing or if that's everyone's thing, but it seems pretty universal. Yeah. So, I don't want to discourage anyone from reading Accidental Initiation. So, if people dig it, check it out. And it is, I mean, I guess there's something, maybe from a punk rock standpoint, Olympia is a punk rock town, and there is a certain charm to, like, a punk rock band that doesn't really know how to play their instruments, but knows how to tell the truth in a compelling way. And maybe Accidental Initiations is kind of like that.
You just mentioned Radio 8-ball. It's a show which you created, which you also host. Could you tell our audience a bit more about the concept of this show and how you came up with the name Radio 8-ball?
Well, Radio 8-ball is a musical divination format where we answer questions by picking songs at random and interpreting them like musical tarot cards, or like shaking a musical 8-ball. Hence, that's where the name came from. I started the show in 1998 on a college radio station in Olympia, and it ran there for about 10 years. And at that time, we were taking questions from the audience, and who would call in, and then we played CDs on shuffle function, and those would be the answers to the questions, and then we'd talk about how the song related to the question, and we had a lot of fun there. And then I ended up taking it to an AM station in Seattle that was a commercial station, and then started doing it as a live show with live bands and celebrities Skyping in on a big screen. And now, the last 2 years, I've been doing it as a podcast. You can find all the places you find podcasts. And there are, I think, 624 individual episodes up, each of which features a question from an interesting person, some of them celebrities like John C. Reilly or Viggo Mortensen or Patricia Arquette or Tig Notaro or others, and then answered by songs performed by live musical guests, usually performing their own songs. And you can find that all at Radio8ball.com. That's with the number 8, Radio8ball.com, or really all the regular podcast providers from iTunes to Spotify to Google Play and on and on and on. So yeah, and basically the whole thing is synchronicity, and like I've been doing it for 20 years, and every time there's a magical synchronicity that happens, and maybe sometimes we don't always recognize it when it first hits us, but when you go back, you're always just sort of marveling at how ever present the synchronicity is if we are ready to engage it.
You just mentioned some of your guests, which you have had over the past couple of years, Patricia Arquette and also Viggo Mortensen. How do you figure out which guests would be most appropriate for a certain episode? As I understand, they also have several subjects to share, like Patricia Arquette. I recently rewatched this segment of your show, and she also offered some insight on her work also with poor people. How does it usually come about?
There's a synchronistic flow to it. I certainly have intentions. Sometimes we'll build around a celebrity, like Viggo Mortensen. He's a very busy guy. When he's working, he doesn't do any interviews. The guy doesn't have any social media presence. The only reason I was really able to reach out to him was because his manager, Lynn Rollins, used to be one of my agents, and I introduced them long ago. And when I was in Tripwire with Viggo, well, I think he would probably laugh if you thought of him as a co-star. I mean, we were both. I was sort of the kidnapped kid in it, and he was the third terrorist from the left. But we had a nice, fun little scene where I threw acid in his face, and we talked about music at the time, and he told me he was looking for an agent, and he met Lynn, and things went well there. And so, anyway, my point is that even with all of that, it took a very long time to get him booked, just because finding an opening in his schedule when he was in that mode. And when it worked out, we had he gave a lot of his time and energy to it. But with someone like that, then I built the show around him, around that celebrity. He'd hate to be called a celebrity, but, he knows how it is. Famous person. But then a lot of times, like when we had Fred Armisen on, it's because Tracy Bonham was the musical guest, and I asked her to invite some folks to do it, and she invited Fred, and he was happy to get on the line, and then that's the way that happened. And that's sort of, I can't say which one I prefer. I love when there's an artist who I've been reaching out to for a long time, and engaging that superpower of patience of like, okay, well, it might take 6 years to get them to say yes, but as long as they keep saying maybe, that's, we'll just hold on to it. And when one of those comes through, it's super exciting. And at the same time, it's also really fun when you just sort of like wake up one morning and the musical guest says, hey, we're going to have Weird Al Yankovic as the guest. Holy cow. I would never have even thought we could. He was another guest with Tracy Bonham. She's very good. She's a very well-connected lady.
Patience certainly pays off, and sometimes you do get a nice surprise, and it's great to see things work out. I mean, it's great, awesome.
Also, and I got to say, I mean, even though they don't have the sort of the same name recognition, I'll be honest, most of the best questions and conversations we have on Radio 8-ball are with people who were less famous, just because they're a little bit less guarded. They're a little bit less, polished at being on doing interviews. And yeah, they just have less to protect, and so they're a little bit more, there's just more room for surprises. Plus, you don't know them. So there's this revelation that happens when someone all of a sudden peels off with an amazing story. I think his name was Jay, I forget his last name, but I hate that, but he was on the episode with Myra Flynn, our Radio 8-ball episode with Myra Flynn, who's an amazing singer-songwriter. I encourage anyone to check her out. And he starts talking about being on tour with Smokey Robinson, playing music with Smokey Robinson, and then he starts telling the story about going to Motown they're in Detroit, and they're like, hey, Smokey, we should go check out Motown. And they go, and it's sort of like the Paul McCartney thing with going back to Liverpool with James Corden. I don't know if you've seen that video, but it was the way he's describing it. He's telling the story about Smokey walking through all these rooms and pointing out this is what happened here, what happened there. You just stumble across a story like that, and you just sort of in awe of being there and having that spill out, especially you can understand as a podcast host. I mean, that's better than anything that I'm going to say in this entire interview. Just because, for me, that's like one of those like golden things. Like, because when someone tells you a good story, it puts you right there. It's almost like it happened to you in a little way. Like you're only 1 degree from how cool that was. Anyway, yeah. So I do love hosting the Radio 8-ball show. It is my great passion, my great joy, and possibly my great folly.
Andras, now I would love to talk about your career as a musician and songwriter. And as I understand, you have been writing songs for many, many years. At what point in your life did you discover your talent and your affinity for music?
That would go back to high school as well, probably about 15. I started writing my own songs. I moved out to LA as much to be a musician as I did to be an actor. Particularly after my best friend from high school, who I played music with, a guy named Josh Claytonfeld, moved out the year after I did, and we started a band together. And that really, it was a band called The Boon, and it was you can find find our demo on Bandcamp. And Josh went on to form the band School of Fish, and that had a hit with Three Strange Days. And I went off to do my own thing with a band called Mr. Jones and the Previous, and did the full-on indie thing, put out many CDs and EPs, and did many tours. Yeah, songwriting has been for me the purest expression. If Radio 8-ball is the thing that I'm the most devoted to, the writing music is just always a joy, especially if it isn't necessarily attached to trying to achieve anything beyond, moving air in a harmonic way and maybe connecting with whoever's in the room and finding, I guess having the ambition of finding nice rooms to play in for people who want to hear what you're doing. But yeah, Well, this is where where I hope you can just play some of it, because talking about it is because it's sort of the most pure expression. It's the most difficult to really talk about.
Your new album has been released, which is called All You Get. And could you tell me a bit about the origins of this album and when you started to conceptualize it and when you started to collect your first ideas for it?
Well, it was written, but let me go back and say that I made this record at the turn of the millennium, right before I pretty much walked away from the music career that I've been very devoted to for about 12, 13 years in terms of putting out records and touring. And that was around 2001, 2002. And I wrote most of the songs between 98, 99, and between 99 and 2001. Other than one song, which goes back, it's probably the oldest song I've written, a song called You Moved to Chicago. I wrote back when I was in high school, or started writing when I was in high school, and sort of just kept whittling at for years and years and years. But the record is called All You Get, and it is kind of it's a record that's about being optimistic about disappointment in a way. And in a certain way, I feel like looking back on it now, it really expresses something about that 2001 time, that sense of, that, I don't know, there was a sense of knowing that something weird was coming, but not knowing exactly what it was. Now I'm getting into almost sounding like Bob Dylan's song about me, Mr. Jones. You know, something's happening, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? And there was something in that, like the record, the guy who wrote the record was optimistic about things that later turned out that there was that optimism may have been misplaced. I sometimes think of it like it's a picture of a guy on a beach with this gigantic wave about to crash down on him, but he doesn't see the wave. He just sort of feels like it's kind of a rainy day. And it's like, oh, well, I don't mind a rainy day. I can be good on a rainy day. And then there's this big wave that's about to crash down on him. And that wave is the 21st century. And for me, there were some, personal heartbreaks, including the death of my friend, Josh Clayton-Felt, who I mentioned before, and the end of a marriage, and just deaths in the family, and things that I think there was a real national heartbreak around Bush in 2001, and the stolen election, and then 9/11, and then the endless war, and the Patriot Act, and all of the stuff that leads us to where we are now. And that the record captures, I think, a little bit of a strange little piece in the eye of the storm. And it's an intimate, strange record that I made with a really great song producer in Vancouver named Ford Peter, and some great musicians from that area, like Veda Hilly and Barry Marachnik, who plays drums with Nico Pace, and Frazee Ford and Samantha Parton from the Be Good Tanyas. And it's a really, it's a record I'm very proud of.
You just mentioned one of the songs actually was written, or you had the idea when you were back in high school. But how do you usually come up with music and lyrics? How do you explore new musical themes?
Well, as a writer, this is where the acting comes in. You start playing some chords, and then, that's actually, it's funny, I was just watching a thing where Paul McCartney was talking about songwriting, and he was saying, he described it personally. It's like you start playing some chords, and then you just sing, you just sort of throw it out there. You see what comes out of your face. And then the acting part is that you're improvising not just with words and emotion, but you're improvising with words and emotion and tonality, and which I think, to some degree actors do. But when there's music there, I think this is why guitar, when it was learning to play guitar, that brought out the songwriter in me, because there are these patterns that are there, and once you're playing it, it just sort of, it brings out certain expressions that then, the tonality of something will suggest a phrase, and vice versa, and those are going back and forth, and it's sort of happening seamlessly in the private improv, which is songwriting. And so then something, you say something that just rings true. Like I've heard lots of songwriters say this is the case for them, and it's definitely been the case for me, that I'll make myself cry or laugh, and that's a good indicator that you're onto something. But the great thing about a song is, I said I wrote that song, started writing that song when I was 15. Part of it was that it was it was a song that sort of taught me how to play guitar in a lot of ways, and I was trying to do things that were more complicated than I could do at the time, and so I had to grow as a guitar player to play it. But for the most part, the song was written lyrically at that time, and it's in a lot of ways it expresses some, I think, maybe some immature points of view, but they're honest. I don't mind being wrong in a song as long as I'm honestly wrong. But mostly, the thing that's great about songwriting is you can finish it in an afternoon or a couple of days. And then maybe you tinker a little bit, but most songwriters I know, they'll say, the bulk of a song, especially if you're the kind of guitar player songwriter, maybe if you're a composer like Burt Bacharach or something, it's a different process. It's a little bit more intellectual. But when you're an instinctive songwriter who's like playing your instrument and just singing it out like a Springsteen or something like that, those kind of songs usually get written within days of when you start them. And that's great, because you can really capture that moment. They become real time capsules that, again, they can tell you how wrong you were. And so optimistically so, sometimes.
Andras, on All You Get, you have had several really cool songs, and I seem to believe that many fans also are very into this record. Do you usually get feedback from fans as to how they enjoyed the album or which track they preferred?
It's strange. You'd think that what you want when you put it out there, you think that you're asking for a response. And when you don't get one, you feel bad. But when you do get one, it's a little bit complex, because, and this is sort of what drives Radio 8ball, is the idea that, like, really once it's out there and in someone's headphones, it's not your song anymore. It's the answer to their question. It's a very personal thing to them. And it's tempting. Like I said, I'm going to go see The Who. I've spent a lot of time as a young person projecting my personality onto The Who, having arguments about The Who, having arguments with The Who, having, just like projecting. And none of it has to do with the people in it, really. I've actually had a couple of interactions with, I had an interaction with Daltrey once, and I had a wonderful interaction that was just more like a fan interaction. I had an actual sort of pure interaction with Pete Townsend once that was amazing, but at the same time, even at that time, I was so overwhelmed with being a fan of him or them that he was very gracious about it at the time that I was there. But I've heard that there are times when he hasn't been, and I don't think anyone knows how to do it gracefully all the time. So I'll be honest. Sometimes I'm good at getting feedback, and sometimes I'm not very good at it. I've tried to learn to just be gracious and say thank you. But when I'm talking with other artists about feedback, I always tell them, if you're doing it for the feedback, you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
I encourage people not to care what other people think. because if you do what you do, and if people like it, they're going to like it, and if they don't like it, they're not going to like it. And no matter what you do, there's going to be plenty of both. And just the only thing that's really right is your own compass for what makes you cry or laugh when you're writing it. I don't know if I said the title of the song that I wrote a long, long time ago is called "You Moved to Chicago."
Yeah.
And it's sort of a love the one you're with type thing. And again, I'm not 100% sure I want to hang my hat on it philosophically, but it's definitely an honest expression of what I was thinking about when I was more like probably 16, 17 years old. But most of the record is, I hope, a little bit more mature. And the title track, All You Get, is what I usually encourage people to check out, because it really does express the whole theme of the record. And I think maybe the aesthetic as well.
Right. Are you going to be touring to further promote your album, All You Get?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, there's talk about doing a Radio8ball tour that might coincide with some dates for me playing music. I know I'm going to be playing a show at the Hotel Cafe on October 24th in LA. And the record's been getting some play at radio stations around the country, and so I have to start doing some research on clubs in those towns. And definitely 2020 I plan on playing some live shows. It's got to find a trombone player who wants to come out on the road with me. Actually, are you familiar with my German language film, April's Arrival?
I think I did come across it once, but I vaguely remember. Could you tell me a bit about that?
It was directed by Michel Schottenberg and co-starred Maria Biel, and they're big, I guess, at the time, and maybe still are very well regarded in the Austrian film and theater community. And Michel he was on a run of films, and after having a very successful theatrical career, and they came to LA and found me, and I played sort of an Oedipus type character in a very surrealistic, gorgeous film called Avril's Ankommen, Avril's Arrival. And it played some festivals, and it was strange because even though I spoke my lines in English, it's only ever come out as a dubbed version with my voice dubbed in German.
Okay.
But I understand it has some kind of, critical acclaim. Very unique film, and it was probably my best experience of just being on a set.
Andras, do you have anything else on your mind regarding your career or your latest album? Is there anything else left you would like to share with me or with our audience?
If I was going to leave your audience with one thing, I know you're interested in music and film. To me, we're talking about synchronicity. We're talking about syncing music and film, and there's the specific intentional way we do that, and then there's what that suggests to us as viewers and as experiencers. And what we do on Radio8ball, playing with music and synchronicity, is another version of that. And the synchronicity that I referred to about being in Nightmare on Elm Street and growing up as the son of a dream psychologist, and that these crazy synchronicities happen all the time. And there's something about the nature of film and music and the synchronicity between the two that I think actually generates those. And I invite people to explore that through the realm of Radio8ball. But I would also just, if that's your bag, check us out in Radio8ball, and we'd love to have you along for the adventure. And if it's not, there are all kinds of entryways to the exploration of synchronicity in media and music. And we've talked about some of them in this podcast, like the Sync Book Press that people put out my book, and Accidental Initiations. And there's just a lot of doorways into that realm of exploration. And for some reason, that ethos and aesthetic has I've been attracted to, and it has been attracted to me throughout my career. So if there is something there of interest, then probably the concept of synchronicity and how it expresses itself in media is going to be a part of that. So check out Radio8ball.com and all of its tributaries.
Andras, I would love to thank you again for taking so much time out of your busy schedule. I really loved talking to you. I had a blast here. It was so much fun. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
I did. Thank you so much. And let me know when this posts.